On the rocky shores of Casco Bay, Maine, there are ruins. Just some old granite foundations, mostly hidden by weeds and time. But these stones are all that is left of a place called Greyhore Estate. It was here, in the harsh winter of 1903, that a story of profound psychological cruelty unfolded. It is a story that was almost completely erased from history. It involves a brother and a sister, and a companion caught in the middle. Their names were Maximilian Vantmore, Parthenia Vantmore, and Sophronia. Their experience serves as a chilling reminder of how easily the human mind can be turned into a laboratory, especially when no one is watching. The main figures in this quiet tragedy are bound by family and circumstance. Parthenia Vantmore was a woman plunged into deep grief. Her husband and young son had been lost in a sailing accident just months before. Her brother Maximilian was an amateur psychologist. He was a man of his time, fascinated by the new and largely unregulated field of the human mind. He saw his sister's sorrow not just as a family tragedy, but as an opportunity for an experiment. And then there was Sophronia, Parthenia's companion. She was there to support her friend, but instead found herself trapped in the same psychological web. The events that took place at Greyhore were not marked by physical violence. There were no chains, no locked doors in the conventional sense. The prison was one of the mind. Maximilian Vantmore used his position of trust and authority to systematically dismantle the realities of his sister and her friend. He called it a treatment. He framed it as an intellectual pursuit. But what he actually did was a methodical and calculated form of abuse. He aimed to control their very perceptions of the world, leaving scars that, while invisible, were devastatingly deep and permanent for those who endured them. This story is not just about a single, isolated incident from over a century ago. It's about the nature of power. It's about how trust can be weaponized. The tale of Greyhore Estate forces us to confront uncomfortable questions. How does this kind of abuse happen? Why do people stand by and let it? And perhaps most importantly, are we so different today? The granite foundations on the Maine coast are a quiet testament to a horror that was deliberately forgotten. Now it is our job to remember it, and to understand what it tells us about ourselves. To understand what happened at Greyhore, you have to place yourself back in 1903. It was a time of immense change and excitement. Psychology was a young and thrilling field. It was not the regulated professional discipline we know today. There were no ethics committees, no review boards, and very few rules. Men like Maximilian Vantmore, wealthy and educated amateurs, could style themselves as pioneers. They saw the human mind as a new frontier to be conquered. And like many frontiers in history, this one was explored with a certain ruthless disregard for the inhabitants. The social structure of the era also played a crucial role. This was a world dominated by patriarchal authority. Maximilian was the man of the family. He held the power, both socially and financially. Parthenia and Sophronia, as women, were in a position of dependence. In the wake of Parthenia's personal tragedy, this imbalance became even more extreme. She was emotionally vulnerable, grieving, and looking for guidance. Maximilian stepped into that void, not as a caring brother, but as a researcher seizing a unique chance to test his theories on human subjects who could not refuse. His research was built on a foundation of absolute control. He isolated the two women at the remote Greyhore estate for the winter. He told them it was for their own good, a retreat to help them heal from their trauma. This isolation was the first and most critical step in his experiment. By cutting them off from friends, family, and the outside world, he made himself the sole arbiter of their reality. He became the only voice they heard, the only source of information. This complete dependency was not a side effect of his treatment. It was the entire point of it. In this context, Maximilian's actions were not seen as inherently sinister by the few who may have been aware of them. He was a man of science, a man of standing. He was helping his bereaved sister. The idea that psychological manipulation could be a form of profound harm was not yet part of the public consciousness. The damage he was inflicting left no visible marks. it was a silent, internal destruction. And in a world that only understood harm you could see, the slow dismantling of a person's soul went completely unnoticed and unchallenged. The winter of 1903 to 1904 at Greyhore Estate was a season of methodical cruelty. Maximilian Vantmore's experiment was simple in its design, yet terrifying in its execution. He set out to systematically break down Parthenia and Sophronia's trust in their own senses and memories. It began with small things. He would move an object, a book or a teacup, and then deny having done so. He would insist they misremembered a conversation from only moments before. He would contradict their perceptions of the weather, telling them it was sunny when they could see rain through the window. It was a constant, low-level assault on their reality. This process was relentless. Every day, Maximilian would introduce new contradictions, each one designed to create a sense of confusion and self-doubt. He framed his actions as a way to strengthen their minds against the delusions of grief. He was the calm, rational authority figure, and they were the unstable, emotional patients. Sophronia later described it in a letter as the systematic theft of self. He would patiently explain that their memories were faulty, that their feelings were unreliable. He was, in essence, gaslighting them, long before that term ever existed, convincing them they could no longer trust the evidence of their own minds. The psychological pressure was immense. The two women were trapped not just by the snow and the remote location, but by their emotional dependence on Maximilian. He was Parthenia's brother, the one who was supposed to be protecting her. This betrayal of trust was perhaps the most damaging element of all. How do you fight back against a reality that is being dismantled by someone you are supposed to love and rely on? The very act of questioning him was presented as further proof of their mental instability. Their struggle for sanity was reframed as a symptom of their illness. By the end of that winter, the damage was done. The experiment, from Maximilian's perspective, was a success. He had demonstrated that a person's reality could be reshaped from the outside. But for Parthenia and Sophronia, it was a catastrophe. They had been subjected to a form of psychological destruction carried out with methodical precision. They were left with a profound and terrifying uncertainty, a fear that their own minds were no longer their own. The quiet of Greyhore Estate had been filled with a horror that would echo for the rest of their lives. After that terrible winter, a profound silence fell over the events at Greyhore Estate. Parthenia and Sophronia never spoke publicly about what had happened to them. There were no newspaper articles, no public accusations, no cries for justice. Their voices were effectively silenced. This was not because they had nothing to say, but because the world they lived in had no language to understand their experience. How could they describe the theft of one's own mind in an era that barely recognized the mind as something that could be stolen? Their trauma was invisible, and therefore, it was dismissed. The power structures of the time were instrumental in maintaining this silence. Maximilian Vantmore was a respected, wealthy man from a prominent family. Parthenia and Sophronia were women, one of whom was already labeled as emotionally fragile due to her grief. Had they tried to speak out, their claims would have been easily dismissed as hysteria or the lingering effects of sorrow. Maximilian held all the authority. He could have simply claimed he was providing care for his unstable sister, and society would have believed him. Their silence was not a choice. It was a condition imposed upon them by a world that was not ready to listen. Even within the nascent medical and psychological communities, there was a concerted effort to bury the story. Decades later, in 1952, a graduate student discovered that a medical society had deliberately destroyed most of Maximilian's papers. This was not done to condemn his actions, but to protect the reputation of the field. They feared his work might be seen as legitimate or, worse, be replicated. Instead of exposing the abuse and creating ethical safeguards, they chose to erase it. It was a cover-up designed to protect the powerful, not the victims. The institution chose to hide its skeletons rather than confront them. Maximilian himself never faced any consequences. He died convinced he had done nothing wrong, viewing his experiment as a contribution to knowledge. Parthenia never fully recovered from the psychological damage, living out her life in the shadow of what was done to her. Sophronia managed a partial recovery, but the scars remained. Their story became a secret, a ghost in the archives of psychology. It demonstrates a chilling truth. When abuse is subtle and the victims are vulnerable, society often finds it easier to look away, to forget, and to let the silence stand. It is tempting to look at the Greyhore estate experiments as a relic of a bygone era. We have ethics committees now. We have professional standards and a deeper understanding of psychological trauma. And yet, the core dynamics of the story, the abuse of power, the manipulation of trust, and the exploitation of vulnerability, are still alarmingly present in our world today. The tools may be different, but the fundamental pattern of harm persists. The story of Maximilian and Parthenia is not just history. It is a mirror reflecting ongoing struggles. Think about the power imbalances that exist in modern relationships, workplaces, and institutions. A charismatic leader in a high-control group, an abusive partner in a coercive relationship, or even a corporation using sophisticated marketing to manipulate consumer behavior. In each case, a powerful entity uses psychological tactics to undermine an individual's autonomy and sense of reality for their own gain. They may not call it an experiment, but the goal is the same: to control. The systematic dismantling of a person's confidence and perception is a form of abuse that continues to thrive in the shadows. The digital age has also created new venues for this kind of manipulation. Online misinformation campaigns, cyberbullying, and the curated realities of social media can all contribute to a sense of confusion and self-doubt. Algorithms can create echo chambers that reinforce a distorted view of the world, isolating people just as effectively as the remote Greyhore estate did. We are constantly bombarded with narratives designed to shape our thoughts and feelings, often by unseen forces with their own agendas. The battle to trust our own judgment in the face of overwhelming external pressure is a very modern struggle. Even with our current ethical guidelines, vulnerability can still be exploited within professional contexts. The trust placed in doctors, therapists, teachers, and mentors is immense. While the vast majority of these professionals are ethical, the potential for abuse remains. When a person in a position of authority decides to exploit that trust, the damage can be profound and difficult to prove. The victims, like Parthenia and Sophronia, may find themselves disbelieved or told they are misinterpreting the situation. The core problem, the abuse of an inherent power imbalance, has not gone away. Remembering the story of Greyhore Estate is not about dwelling on a morbid piece of history. It is an act of justice. It is about giving a name to a form of suffering that was, for a century, rendered nameless and invisible. By uncovering this story, we validate the experiences of Parthenia and Sophronia. We acknowledge that the systematic theft of self is not a dramatic fiction, but a real and devastating form of abuse. Telling their story is the first step in honoring their reality and ensuring that such silent horrors are not so easily forgotten again. The importance of this goes beyond just this one case. When we name a harm, we make it possible to see it elsewhere. The story of Greyhore gives us a framework for understanding psychological manipulation in our own time. It teaches us to look for the subtle signs of coercion, the patterns of control, and the ways in which powerful people can reframe abuse as help or for your own good. It reminds us that the deepest wounds are not always physical. We must learn to listen for the stories that are not being told, and to trust the voices of those who say their reality is under attack. Sophronia's letter, a lone voice from the past articulating the horror of losing her mind, is a powerful testament. It reminds us that victims often know exactly what is happening to them, even if they lack the language or the power to make others believe them. Our duty is to create a world where such voices are heard, respected, and believed. We must challenge the impulse to dismiss claims of psychological abuse as mere oversensitivity or misunderstanding. We must stand with the vulnerable and affirm that their perception of their own experience is valid. Ultimately, the ruins on Casco Bay are a monument to the importance of ethical vigilance. They warn us that knowledge without empathy is dangerous, and power without accountability is destructive. By remembering Parthenia Vantmore and Sophronia, we are not just looking back at a tragedy. We are making a commitment to the present and the future. A commitment to protect the vulnerable, to challenge the abuse of power in all its forms, and to insist always on the fundamental right of every individual to own their own mind. Their story was silenced once. We must not let that happen again.